if you look at how the paradigms shift, there's a slow going until one point, and then everything changes. And I think we are still in that slow going, although, when we started 2017, a lot has changed. As Peter said, now we don't really have to prove ourselves. Now people know what we're talking about.
Hey, Mira and Peter, thank you so much for joining me. You know what we're talking about today. We're talking about culture. We're talking about how that's evolving, how that's helping us to change the way that we work. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi. My name is Mira, and this is...
I'm Peter.
And, we are co-founders of The Mind Takeaway. We are a beauty consultancy focusing on leadership development through coaching, mentoring, and training. And big things, and I guess this is why we connected as well, for us are mental health at work and D&I, and that's baked into everything that we do with leaders.
We're really keen about leadership development. That's our sweet spot. So it's everything to do with that. So how does a leader, get better aligned to, you say one thing, but then quite often people do the opposite. And so it's all about us helping them build trust, more equity, trying to be fair. And we'll come on to that later, I'm sure, when we talk about, appraisals and how do we measure people with KPIs and whatever.
I can't wait. I cannot wait to dig into that. So let's start off with what leadership development is, because I think a lot of people probably have an idea of what it is, but what does it actually mean, and how do you practice that within the Mind Takeaway?
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, let me start. So it's interesting. I think there is this belief that you are either born leader or you're not. And I think it's really, really wrong, because we develop different skills while we are growing up, but then we keep on and we continue developing our skills. And so leadership development is basically developing those leadership skills that we really need today. And the need for leadership skills in the past was different, because we thought leadership was different, and also world was different, economy were different, everything was different. And now we are living in a different world where technology is big, everything is running really fast. And people's awareness, the way we work is different. So leadership has to be developed differently. The leadership skills that we need now are a little bit different than the skills that were maybe 50 years ago. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I would love to know, knowing this now, and I'm guessing the pandemic also changed leadership skills and really fast-tracked us to needing leaderships to evolve very quickly, because we went from one dimension into another without even knowing it was happening, right? It just kind of it just kind of literally flipped instead of morphing, which is what it's been doing in the past. What does the future of leadership look like? Everybody talks about leadership all the time. Leadership, execs. What does the future actually look like for leaders? And what does that look like for people who are not leaders? What does that look like?
Well, our best guess with all the work that we've been doing. And yeah, you're right. Since COVID, things have changed. I mean, people talk about new paradigms, right? I mean, we feel like we've been in a new paradigm of leadership way before COVID, because it's got easier, shall we say. So pre-2020, 2017, when we started the company, the kind of things that we were sharing in, podcasts like this, or having conversations or coaching our clients with, people were like, more prove it. I don't believe that, or that looks like it's something new. Now, people, when you say servant leadership or vulnerability, or you talk about mental health in leadership, or you talk about building trust and transparency, or, for example, psychological safety, people are, I kind of get that. But then that's only one part of the story. So leadership is really, yes, we all academically get stuff, but then you have to take action. There's bravery, for example. So quite often with clients, we talk about, when are you going to be brave? You have to lean into a really complicated conversation. You need to give a colleague feedback, because they're misbehaving, how are you going to do it in a really human-centric way? You know, so you can still build trust, you can still have transparency, and also the person's going to go, okay, maybe I could improve. You know, they'll listen to that feedback and receive it. So we see leadership now, it's more about I wouldn't say soft skills, but these in-demand skills like collaboration, creativity, and showing up and how to communicate better, and definitely coaching and mentoring, which quite often, I'll be honest, our longer term clients get it. You know, companies we work with like Lego, they're really way ahead of the curve because they don't need to be told that they need to create better coaches and mentors in their people managers. You know, they just know that they can measure the results from when they actually develop and coach and train them. Because a better coach or a better mentor as a manager, go figure, right? You know, you're getting more support. That person's going to probably get the best out of you and leave you to do your best work. So the old paradigm is, if it makes it easier, it's command and control. It's micromanagement. It's like, hey, I'm your boss. You should do that now. And it's very dictatorial. I know better than you. I'm going to tell you how to do your job. But actually, the next level leadership is, I trust you to do your job. I value you. I fully empower you, and you are a self-leader. I might be your boss, but I trust you to go off and do your best work. And that's when the flexibility comes in. You can work a few hours in the day, don't pick your kids up, you know, and that's what I see in a high-performing team. A low-performing team is really, as I said, command and control. You know, I won't name the brands, but we can all think of companies that people have no autonomy, no flexibility, and they have very low self-leadership skills. So to be fair, the future of leadership is actually training everyone, every employee to be a better leader in themselves. And then that way, if you're the people manager, you've got an easier job. I wouldn't say easy job, but it gets easier, right?
That for me is so easy to understand. Thank you so much for explaining it in that way, in this paradigm shift. And I think a lot of people will also be able to understand that, especially if you have been working through this shift, like, which is what I have and many others. Is I remember before under the old way that people used to work, and then how we morphed into this newer space, and how we're also going further than what we were before, where there was, you know, we had kind of flat hierarchies, but we still had some level of control, and how that's easing up more, and how COVID has helped us to take some of that control away, because there's only so much control that you can have, right? Which leads me on to my next question is, so in 2034, LinkedIn says that the majority, or like 50%, I think, almost the majority, right, are no longer going to be working the typical 9 to 5. Now, obviously, I think a lot of us can already see that happening, right? We can see what's happening. And also, I feel like organizations, big organizations also see that and are trying to gain some control back, but it's almost inevitable. And how can we prepare leaders and leadership and structures for that new way of working? How are we going to be able to lead and support our teams in a digital way?
I'll start, and then I think Peter mentioned it just 2 minutes ago. Self-leadership. Excuse me. I think, if you want people to work in a different time zones, different times, when somebody's working, somebody is doing something else, but they're working on the same project, we need to have a certain level of independence in work and independency making decisions. I think what happened with command and control was that people didn't really had any autonomy, and they only had to listen and to what managers told them, or they needed always to have approvals for everything. And there's this fear of making mistakes. So what's happening now is that if we want to be able to work like that, we need to be able to have certain level of autonomy in making decisions, but also at the same time be connected and working collaboratively more, I think, rather than and then sticking with the plans, and I think you can.
Yeah, the other bit, and we were explaining this to a client the other day, actually, that they were saying, what's your best guess? And I'm saying, we never say we're experts, right? We're always learning, we've got great experience, I guess. And, we're lucky to do what we do. But quite often what we've noticed, and this is really from all of our experience over the last couple of years, at least, especially since COVID, is that productivity is not measured correctly. So if you want, it's like, duh, right? Because there's books like, there's Cal Newport. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's got an amazing book called Slow Productivity. And I really resonate with that. He's also got a really good podcast. Mira's looking for the book. It's probably somewhere behind us there.
I see it.
Yeah, you see it. So what he says in the book, and I won't go into the book fully now because I know, time is the essence, but what he's saying is that historically in the world of work, we are measuring the wrong things. So for example, if you want a new paradigm of working, so it is shifting, we're working more flexible slowly but surely, which is amazing. It took a horrible thing, which was COVID, to kick companies into forcing them to take action. But for example, when I was working in operations for 20 plus years, I was always measuring, KPIs, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're always kind of linked to financials usually. And quite often it was really, my bosses were really worried about how people were clocking in and clocking out, even though I didn't work in a factory, let's be honest. I worked in multiple industries and it was the same thing. So just to be clear, I would tell my team, I trust you, I empower you. My bosses might be saying something different, which was tricky, because I didn't want to get myself fired. But I was saying to my team, our secret is I've got your back. I will remove bottlenecks. I will try to make it as flexible as I can, but let's be realistic in the situation and the awareness that we have with the company that we're in and the community and the culture that exists. So I tried to give them as much autonomy as I could, but you have to be realistic. So if people in workforce management are breathing down your neck and they're trying to prove how many hours you've logged, which is bizarre, right? Because you could log in 30, 40 hours a week, but that doesn't actually mean you're productive at all. What I wanted to measure is my team's results. Yeah. So you, for example, if you were in my team, you might go and pick your child up from the nursery, but you come back and then you log back in and you do a couple of hours work. But over the week, it averages out. I trust you. You're an adult. I don't really care in a nice way if you go to the dentist or whatever, because I know that ultimately I've got your back and you've got mine, because we speak about performance in one-to-ones. We know what the targets are. And we'll come on to that probably later, but I don't really like KPIs quite often because they're very cold, hard figures and facts about, what a company measures performance on, right? But our job as leaders, tell me if I'm wrong, maybe you can chime in on this, is that when you talk about KPIs as a manager, as a people manager, you must bring them to life. So if you can do that, then people, okay, that's what that really weird acronym means about, that's what that number is related to. Yeah, you need to bring it to life and be good at storytelling when you're a leader. So again, I know I'm going around the houses, but when you talk about productivity and the new ways of working, how could we even change the new ways of working if we're not even able to measure how productive we are? No company cares about the results quite often, bizarrely. They care about the results of the appraisals, the quarterly measurements, the half-year measurements. But then bizarrely, during the week, all I care about, I don't know about you two, is when I had teams, I just wanted them to do the job over the period. I wasn't so concerned about, okay, if someone's completely late this and being, late all the time and being disrespectful, but that's a different thing, right? Yeah. But I see companies in America, sadly, using covert clandestine technology to track people's productivity. And that's a complete nonsensical thing, because how do I know you've been logged in over 10 hours in your home? How do I know what you're doing? I have to allow you to do your best work, but I also am mindful that your dog might be sick. You might have your kids running around in the background. How do you track that? You don't. I just trust you to do your job.
So Mira, how do we get companies from thinking like this, as a lot do, right? There's still a lot of demand for control over people, which is hundreds and hundreds of years old. But we know, you and I and many other people who do this work, we know that what Peter has just said, right, that the best way to get the best results for your organization, for employee engagement, employee happiness, for the success of your company, is to have almost a completely different perspective and a completely different practice in how you run your business. Like, what's stopping people from actually doing that? If they know, right? We always know.
They know. Yeah. I guess once they know, then they change. But I think the change is hard. Change is not comfortable. People are, you know what you do works in certain way. It doesn't matter if there is something better. This is still safe, And so I think more companies come with different ways of working, and so then there will be a bigger pool of things that we can pick up and learn from. Science is picking up. We are learning a lot more about human brain and human productivity and what we can or can't do. And eventually those big companies, those companies that don't turn, will sadly not exist anymore, like many companies up until now. So it's a process of change. I don't think it will happen overnight. There will be, like if you look at parenting, it just crossed my mind. There's so much have changed in the last 20, 30 years. And now you have people adopting totally new ways of parenting that were really scary to do on a very beginning because you were raised differently, maybe, But what is interesting to me is that there is still parents that parent in the old way, and we're okay with that. I guess, we'll kind of live in the balance in between. Some people will be more lucky, some none, and then it will slowly transfer all into working differently. The paradigm, I guess, if you look at how the paradigms shift, there's a slow going until one point, and then everything changes. And I think we are still in that slow going, although, when we started 2017, a lot has changed. As Peter said, now we don't really have to prove ourselves. Now people know what we're talking about.
That's incredible. That's actually quite a short period of time, because I was thinking that it was actually going to take a lot longer. But I think using this paradigm shift as an example of how to almost like visualize and understand what's happening, it helps me to understand, and probably others understand, that we're moving probably at a reasonable pace for human beings' nature. And I think using parenting as an example, as a proxy, was really helpful, because we can all remember, older parenting styles from different generations. And when you think about it now, it's so different to where we were just even when we were children, our parents, our grandparents, etc. And it kind of is having the same pattern. I want to shift the topic slightly and talk about performance framework, because we spoke about this before. And it is one of my favorite things to talk about, but I don't know the solution. I have no idea. But I don't believe what we currently have as a performance review framework, especially in tech, which is the industry that I was in for 6 years. I don't think it works very well. And I'll explain why. And then I want to know what you guys think. In tech, in the last place that I was at, was that it was every 6 months, right? And I think sometimes some of the things that we're working on needs a little bit longer. And I also think that the KPIs that you're set are just purely performance, like numbers based, and not necessarily about some of the soft skills that you might bring, which are absolutely essential. Some of that I think is because a lot of leadership is very male focused. And I think women bring a certain different style of leadership, and that I think that would help in these performance reviews. But also I didn't think that you could ever really be honest, which then I'm like, well, then we're not really reviewing, right? Because they will ask you to review up and they would ask you to do peer-to-peer reviews. And, if you don't have a good manager, then and around specific skills that manager should have, then you're actually unable to really put that in the performance review of that manager. It's impossible, right? Without having a backlash. So how are we actually really measuring performance? What are we measuring? And that's my question is to myself. I'm like, what are we actually measuring? And what is the better way for us to do that? Because I understand it's needed to keep us understanding, what's working and what isn't working, a check-in in some way. But I just don't think that works anymore. Well, I want to know what you think, what you would recommend if you think there's a better way to do it, and if you've seen it work better in other places.
Well, there's no silver bullet for sure. But funny enough, leadership development is key. So like I said earlier, our jobs as managers, or at least that's what I thought my job was when I was, a people manager. I had direct reports. Sometimes I would have, anything from 10, sometimes even 20 appraisals to do. So it was quite challenging. But again, if I wanted those measures, regardless of whether we think they're opaque or they're not clear or they're not equitable, my job was to give my team a fair crack at it. So alls I did, this is what made sense to me over the years, was to bring those numbers alive for the team. This means this. I'm not saying it's fair, but I'm giving you a fair idea of what it is. And I was always as realistic and as fair as I could be without crossing a line or saying it's shit, whatever it was. Because sometimes I agree, the measurements are usually not very good measurements. They're not fair. They're not equitable. There's definitely, I don't want to genderize it too much, but yeah, I mean, I work primarily with a lot of female leaders, so it can be very unfair. And I think quite often for line managers, it's a problem because it creates this dog-eat-dog environment where there's only so much of a pot of money, a budget, which is bizarre because if, you surely would want everyone to overperform, and then you've got a good problem. But you need to have enough money set aside so if people really do pull it out the bag, they need to be paid fairly. And that I don't know about both of your experiences, but that was never the case. I would get them to, my team into a super high performance, and then I'd get bad news from my line manager and the line manager above that, we've only got so much money to play with, even though we were making 26% profits globally for the company. And then I had to go back and pretend my team was stupid and say, hey, we've only got so much money. So the spread, and they work out all these curves with HR about the spread of the bonus, and we can only pick a few winners and all this rubbish, right? So quite often as well, the background which your team doesn't see is there's usually a meeting with a load of line managers who shouts the loudest in a room. And if you're introvert, if you're not comfortable, or, again, gender comes into it, you've got a load of shouty white men who look like me, and you've got a few women in there who don't feel like they've got a voice. Go figure, right? That they probably get a less equitable part of the pot, and then they have to go back to the team and say, hey, I value you, you've done a great job, well done, but you're only going to get a bonus of XXX. So that I saw a lot of that in my career. And then if you want to focus on the actual appraisals, I'm sure HR people don't like me so much. I mean, we've got good friends who are HR experts, right? I'm joking a bit, but quite often I would have quite controlled but heated discussions with HR because I'd be tearing my hair out because I really was like, look, this isn't fair to my team. This appraisal for me, between me and my line manager, it doesn't even make sense. I've done these amazing projects or I've been pushed to do more work, but when it came to my quarterly review or half year review, it wasn't even mentioned, or this was took out. So for me, all I can say is as a line manager, I tried to be as fair as I could, but being realistic that no measurement is ever perfect. KPIs are quite often not really translated very well top down from the CEO to the team or people in the trenches that are doing the job. And definitely the measures, as we said, when productivity finally in the future is measured in a fair, equitable and more transparent way, I'm pretty sure performance frameworks, appraisals will completely dissolve in front of us and become something more fair and realistic. But right now, there isn't an answer for sure. And we talk about it quite often.
There are people, I mean, there are companies that are adding some changes into what they do. So, you might see the one of the KPIs is self-care, and so that kind of stuff is coming in slowly, but it's not something that it's on top of the priority, or I think we'll discover more ways to do it. It's just at the moment, it is.
Well, there are other measures, no? I mean, this is the future again. It's very new and quite experimental in companies, but they're being a bit bold and measuring, for example, collaboration.
Oh, yes.
So like I said, your appraisal is singular, isolated. I need, it's like the Hunger Games, who gets the bigger bonus. But I would like to see a more exciting, more equitable, fair measure of collaboration.
Yeah.
So So how collaborative have you been with your team? You might be really amazing at your job, but it's a total disaster and trampling on people to get up the so-called corporate ladder.
Yeah.
I don't know about you two, but I don't want that in my team.
But this is what we've seen so much of. Like, this is the culture that we've seen. It's dog eat dog. It's, stab you in the back, even very nicely, right? And I think that these even as they stab you smile, it's these reviews that actually bring out that ruthlessness in people, which changes and damages the culture for me, which could be a very pleasant place to work. Is what's happening is sometimes every quarter, twice a year, is you're putting people through this process, which is changing the whole dynamics of where we work and the relationships of the people that we work with. And the thing is that stuck out so much for me, Peter, when you were explaining it, is that there's this lack of trust then between everybody, between the middle management and their senior management, right? And then the employees, the majority of the workforce and their line manager, because they're being told one thing, they're working, achieving, which is happening all the time, right? Because if you don't achieve, they cut you. Yeah. So they are achieving majority of the time. And then they're not getting the results. They're not getting the return on that investment, but the company gets the return on the investment that they make into the work that they're producing. So there's a lack of trust. And I want to end with one question, right? Which is because I read your article with Forbes around, what's happening with leaders and the sentiment around leadership for leaders themselves. And you said that, I think the article says that they'd spoken to 6 different leadership coaches and everybody had said the same thing, is that leaders are burned out. And I'm not surprised. I think in general, a lot of people are on the very brink of a burnout. There's so much information that we're taking in all the time. There's so much that we're required to achieve all the time. But I think it's so interesting to hear that leaders are on the brink of burnout, or they're already burned out. And I wanted to end with what you would recommend that leaders focus on so they can show up and be the best type of leader, not only for their teams, but also for themselves, bearing that in mind.
Self-care.
What does that actually mean today, right? In this working environment?
So it's self-care, but first and foremost, it means increasing our awareness about what works and what doesn't, about ourselves and our energy and how we're showing up and how we make decisions and how our emotions affect all of that. So, we get scared of not hitting the targets, and then everything goes into work and everything else falls off. Family, kids, that hobby that you like, and all of that affect the way you make decisions, the way you show up, the way you communicate with people. I mean, we're always joking, Peter is a musician as well. And at one point, he didn't really do much music because we were busy with the job, or, so what we thought. But then I realized, and I said, you're a much better person when you're doing music regularly, this is your self-care. Self-care doesn't mean that you have to meditate all the time. It is having different interests in life, fulfilling yourself.
Yeah, having fun. I always think of it as like, what are the things that I actually really enjoy doing? What is able to take my mind away from thinking about other things? I'm someone who's always thinking about lots of things, right? So for me, fun, what is fun? That takes me away from thinking about stuff.
Yeah. And what lights you up? And, if you are unsatisfied person, how are you going to show up, and where are you going to lead the company and the people around you? And so, lots of it, obviously, it's much more complicated, and there's so many moving parts in it, and there is, our belief systems a lot and all of that. So, what we do with leaders isn't focused only on self-care, but big part of it is.
The other things are how to prioritize and plan your week better. Anyone who's had certain mileage as an employee knows how to block a calendar and, look at that. But whatever we were to say, it's energy management just as much as managing blocks of time. So what we mean by that is, why is your week not having pockets of break times? Where's the time for research and reflection and critically processing all of that information overload? You go to one meeting, we saw sometimes a client where they would have 6-7 meetings in a day. And I'm like, how is that going for you? And they're like, I feel burnt. And we were like, well, is there, I know that sometimes sadly people don't have the autonomy to push back and say no. I get that, right? But these were quite often senior managers.
Yeah.
And they were causing that problem for themselves. And when they realized that they can actually put a 15, 20, 30-minute break in between and maybe have 3 meetings or 4 meetings and incrementally lower it down, it didn't actually have a detrimental impact on productivity. It actually made them have better impact, better results. So it's stuff like, okay, when you come into work, how did you sleep last night? Maybe it's okay. You're a parent. You were up all night with a crying child. It's okay. But it's that self-awareness when you go into work. It actually then doesn't get in the way. Because if you're aware that you didn't sleep, it's pick your battles, right? You don't need to go and stay in 10 hours if you've literally had 3 hours that night because your child is still teething or something.
I would love to invite you guys on again because I want to talk about information overload. I think that this is a really big topic that people are not speaking about enough, and also was something that I noticed in the German work market. I can't say that I've only ever worked for one German company, but actually when I got there, I was astonished that it was all day back-to-back meetings. And that even when your meetings you already have meetings, people would still put other meetings in. It was just absolutely
insane, right? Yeah.
Insane carnage. I'd never come across a culture, and everybody was doing it, go from meeting to meeting to meeting. Sometimes you could spend the whole day with one person in the same meeting, and I did that for about 4 years. And I was like, this is actually crazy because I'm not actually getting any decent work done because everybody's talking and not doing, and I think it's the same with information overload. We're taking in lots of information and not necessarily putting that into action. And I would love to know your thoughts about that in more detail, but we'll do it another time.